Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for this Facebook Live event. Today we are bringing on Austin Westjohn. Austin is the trombone teaching artist for BDSG advancement programs this fall. He's a very accomplished player. He is the principal trombonist of the Delaware Symphony, and he also plays in the U.S. Army Band's Pershing's Own. If you like the content you see here today, please give us a like or a share. You can follow us at Band Directors Survival Guide on Facebook or Instagram, and you can also find us on the web at www.banddirectorssurvivalguide.com. You can learn more about Austin there, you can learn more about our advancement programs, and you can just learn more about ways that you can augment your teaching for the fall through our blog and through other posts that you can find on our Facebook group. So definitely give us a like, give us a share if anything you find here today is interesting or impactful. So without further ado, let's welcome on Austin Westjohn.
All right. Well, today we have Austin Westjohn with us, and he is our trombone teaching artist for the fall. And Austin, thanks so much for coming on. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us what you're doing now, and kind of maybe how you got started on the trombone, and just a little personal details.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Matt. I'm grateful to be here. So I first started playing the trombone in sixth grade. I grew up in Arkansas, which is not really known as a place where the band is just thriving, but I came from an exceptional band program in Conway and had great teachers and great directors that showed me how to practice from a very early age, which was really helpful for me early on. So I went to school there, ended up going to Harding University for my undergrad. It's a school in central Arkansas, about half an hour from Little Rock. And then I went on to study trombone at Baylor in Texas. Loved it, had a wonderful experience in Texas, eating good barbecue and Mexican food and getting all of that stuff. And then when I was in graduate school, I won my job where I am now with the Army Band Pershing's Own in DC. It's been a fantastic job. I've gotten to see and do a lot of really cool things, play at a lot of very high significant events, which has been really neat. And then shortly after getting my job here, I also won the principal trombone position with the Delaware Symphony. And so during the days, I'll play with the ceremonial band and do a lot of missions, whether it's in Arlington Cemetery or the Pentagon or wherever we're at that day. And then in the evenings, sometimes I'll get to drive up to Delaware and play with the symphony. So it's great. I'm one of the rare people that kind of gets the best of both worlds, the band and the orchestra stuff. So I feel very fortunate for that.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Because I was just talking to Zach Bridges about this too. Because he's in Pershing's Zone with you. He's your colleague, but he also plays in the Maryland Symphony. So you guys are both getting the best of both worlds. And so I just want to ask you a question, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious. When it comes to, there's a lot of military bands. Could you kind of describe like the different levels and like what Pershing's Own is? Because I think, there's premier bands, there's so many different bands. Like, what is Pershing's Own, and how does one become a part of such an elite group?
So that's a good question. The Army is actually, interesting fact, the highest employer of musicians, I believe, in the world. I
Wow.
don't want to. You might have to fact check me on that, but there's like 99 regional bands, or at least there used to be, and so there's a lot of different ensembles that you can play in and represent the military and still make music. I think what makes Pershing's Own special, aside from just the wonderful atmosphere and the culture there, is it's the top musical organization for the United States Army. So it's the premier, it's the chief musical organization, if you will. A lot of the events that we play at, like I was saying earlier, are the highest significance. Zach and I have both played for the president. We've played for a lot of events that are things that you didn't even dream about when you started playing the trombone or whatever it is in sixth grade. It's just not stuff that you thought you would ever do. But it's offered a lot of cool opportunities. But the premier bands are there's several of them in the DC area, and then there's a few others outside. The West Point band. There's some others, but Pershing Zone is the one that represents DC, and it's the chief organization for the United States Army. So becoming a part of that it's a rigorous process. It's just like orchestral auditions. In our case, actually, you have to send in a tape, and then based on your tape, they'll invite a handful of people to the audition, and then have a semifinal round and a final round, and from there it just works just like any other audition. And those of us that work there are just lucky that it worked out for us. So we're very blessed.
It's amazing. Well, you guys also worked really hard to get there, so we can't discount that. But you guys are always so humble about it. But then another interesting factoid is you guys have to go through Army basic training as well, correct?
Yes, that is everybody's story from basic training is different. So, it's a unique time in your life. You only go through it once, and what I tell people is it's the most fun that you'll never want to have again. So it's 10 weeks that you just kind of check it off and you say, yep, I did that. And now I get to play the horn for a living and do something that I love, and I get to work with fantastic colleagues. But it's definitely the rite of passage, if you will. We just kind of go through it and tough it out. So.
All right, it's just a life experience you can say you had. So, well, that's amazing that you get to travel up to Delaware too. Like, how do you juggle both of those things? How often does Delaware perform?
So Delaware does performances about once a month. It's a really, really strong regional orchestra. We've got, I think what makes it so unique is that we've got musicians that come from everywhere. We've got people that come down from New York City. We've got Philadelphia people. We've got Baltimore, and we've got DC folks. So you've got 4 different freelance pools that are all pulling into this one really great orchestra. And it's a fantastic experience getting to play there. They play about once a month, like I was saying. And for me, I always try and carpool with folks. One of the flautists, Elena, is in the Navy band. John McGinnis, the bass trombone player, his wife is in the Army band with me, and he freelances and does a lot of other orchestras in the area. And so a lot of times we carpool together, and that kind of makes it easier driving miles late at night. Rehearsals are like 7:30 to 10, so we usually leave right at 10 when it finishes, and we drive back, and it takes us about 2 hours to get back to DC. So we usually get home about midnight on those nights when we're playing, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great organization. I'd say it's about once a month that they do concerts, and they rotate between chamber and classics concerts. So it's not as often as a trombonist that I'm on the chamber concerts, but I'm always on the classics programs, as that includes the larger orchestral rep that it includes trombone. So
cool. Well, I'm gonna ask you two more personal questions, then we'll move on to some of these other questions. But one of them is, do you have a favorite trombone part to perform in the orchestra?
Like a favorite piece?
Yeah, like a favorite piece to perform, or a favorite part that you personally, as a trombonist, would play. Maybe they're separate.
Wow.
I know, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
One of my favorite things to play, I think, is Stravinsky's Firebird. It's not known as a real heavy, low brass part. I could of course talk about Mahler or Strauss or any of those things that low brass players are always going to be like, yeah. But for me, playing Stravinsky's Firebird is really fun. The first time I played it was at the Hot Springs Music Festival. And it has a trill towards the end with one of the other instruments, and then there's that really funny glissando in there, and then it has that brass, really thick brass writing at the end. There's just something about playing that. There's so many different elements of playing the trombone that it hits in this piece that I just love. I love all the effects, and I love putting it together when it sounds really tight. There's just nothing like the rush I get from playing something like that. So that's one of the pieces that I guess comes to mind for me.
It's a good choice. I love that piece too. All right, last personal question, and that's what made you decide you wanted to play the trombone? I know for most musicians, they just fall in love with the sound. I was wondering if you could shed some light on that for us.
Yeah. So I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was going into band in sixth grade. The band director took us around this room, and they had all these instruments. And I was kind of gravitating towards the brass instruments. I had some friends that were going to be in the trumpet class. And so he brought the trumpet up to me, and he put the mouthpiece up to my face, and they were trying to get me to buzz the mouthpiece. And I just could not get my lips inside the trumpet mouthpiece. It was so small, and I couldn't make it work. And so he thought, okay, well, let's try something a little bigger. And he brought the trombone mouthpiece over, and we tried that. And then he put the trombone up, and I was able to just play like a middle F, which is like the starting note for sixth graders. And so he was like, okay. He's like, this is what we're going to stick you on. And of course, the slide makes the trombone such a unique instrument. I mean, who doesn't like the whole, the glissando effect? So that was something that, of course, drew me to the trombone early on. I mean, I remember even in cartoons as a kid listening to that in like Tom and Jerry and things, and thinking it was such a unique instrument. But really, when that first note kind of happened, it was like, okay, I think I'm going to do this. But I had a long way to go. I was a very bad student early on. I didn't pay good attention, and I was always goofing off and having spit wars with my friends and things. And so if I can get to where I am now, knowing from where I came from, then I believe that anybody can. Because
That's amazing.
I had to get a lot of things together. I was always a good kid, but I definitely didn't take it seriously very early on. Not like I do now. So
you're just proving the stereotype that trombonists are troublemakers, and that's why percussionists and trombonists get along so well, because we're like the unique instruments. We're just troublemakers in the back of the section. So, well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I was going to ask you a few questions now about teaching, like your philosophy on teaching. And so I don't know if you've been teaching online through this whole pandemic, but I was wondering if you could shed some light on ways you've been trying to make it interactive and fun for students to try to kind of replicate a new experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I haven't done as much online teaching here as I was doing teaching in Texas. But online teaching, the ones that I've done a few lessons, and it presents a challenge just because the way, not only is it not the same as interacting in person, of course, as we all know from using Zoom and other things like this, but it also changes the way it sounds a little bit. And so having to kind of just wait a second sometimes for me when I'm listening to someone, I have to kind of process what I'm hearing, maybe even a little more than if I was in person, just to make sure I'm hearing something right. But trying to keep it interactive, I just always, for me as a teacher, I'm always looking for ways for creativity in lessons. And so, something that I've been doing, spending a lot of time at home, is I'll even turn on a karaoke track or something and just be playing by ear with it. And having students do stuff like that on top of the method books and the fundamentals and all the other stuffs we do, just keeping it creative and keeping it fun and engaging. That's something that I've done some, and it seems to pay good results. And people always love doing that. Just picking, say, hey, what's a song that you love? Could be anything, a pop song, a country song. Let's try and play this together. Let's figure out this melody and let's do this together. It's interactive, and it's something that students just they love it. So
yeah, I think that can't be stressed enough, especially right now. Like, making it fun is one of the primary goals, because that's why we all started, because it was fun. So keeping it fun for the students is big. So then that brings me to another question, and that is, when you're first starting out, or you're starting a student out like on the trombone, like what's What's like one of the number one things you're focusing on? Like I know for percussion, it's like getting a really relaxed stroke with the wrist and really allowing the stick to bounce freely. Like, is there like a specific technique you're really focused on with trombone in the beginning?
Yeah, I always, I mean, I think the first thing that's the most important is just the sound. What do we sound like when we play the instrument, and getting this just really vibrant, resonant, centered, efficient sound. I think relaxation, you just commented on that. That goes for everything you do. Just not having any excess tension in the body, and just focusing on breathing and just getting a really relaxed, just even sometimes I'll have a student blow on the back of their hand and just feel the air when you're doing that, and just focus on a totally relaxed, efficient breathing, and then applying that to the trombone. Because the unique thing about brass playing is, or it's not really unique, but we're using lots of air when we play it. But breathing is something that we all already know how to do. And so it's just learning how to channel that into tone production on an instrument. And so I would say sound is the first thing that I think is the most important to address.
Awesome. Awesome. And then, so like with violin, since their strings don't have any frets, they kind of have to learn by muscle memory, and a lot of them have like tape and stuff so that you can figure out where to put your fingers. Like, how do you teach students? Do they just have to memorize the different slide positions, or?
Pretty much. So there's 7 slide positions on the trombone, and this is easy to remember because it coordinates with how many different valve combinations there are on a
Oh.
trumpet or a euphonium or the other brass instruments. But it is unique. There's no frets. It's not like a guitar where we can just choose the fret. I mean, a lot of it is by ear. And so trombone, it's tough because we have no excuse to be out of tune because we have a tuning slide in our hand. Yet because of that, there's also an infinite amount of positions that we could be in. So it's always important for trombone players, especially, to be micro adjusting and just, really, really listening and honing in to where the pitch is. But to your question, yeah, there's 7 slide positions, and we just memorize where those are at. And then from there, once we're in that position, we're often, especially when playing in ensembles, always just trying to adjust to what we're hearing around us. But it gets easier. It's like anything. The more you do it and the more you adjust to it, the easier it becomes.
That's great. And then, so that's interesting though, because since you have to adjust all the time, how do you guys deal with that as like when you're playing in an ensemble, how do you deal with that? Like I've heard a lot of musicians talk about, they're always adjusting to everyone else, but how do you decide who you're adjusting to? And I know that's kind of a more complex question, but it's an interesting ensemble question.
It's a complex thing, and it depends on, of course, the context of what you're playing in. In the orchestra, for style, I'm always listening to the principal trumpet. But for balance and for in terms of just general tuning and intonation, I'm always listening to the tuba, the bass trombone, and those guys, because they're kind of setting the foundation. So it's listening is an interactive skill, and it's something that we have to teach, and it's something that you get better at with experience. And so for me, the micro adjusting on the instrument kind of becomes second nature. I don't always think about it unless it's really particularly bad one day. That happens, but I typically don't try to think about it too much. It's just something that, if I hear something, I'm always just, trying to adjust. One thing that someone said that I thought was really good one time was, I remember there was a colleague of mine that was playing something, and he was just kind of fishing around for the pitch. And what this other guy told him was, hey, he said, don't move the slide both directions. Move it in one direction. Know if you're sharp or flat, and then adjust. Because he knew that he was out of tune, but he didn't know which way. And sometimes that's the way we have to do it. But what this guy was saying is, know what you're at and boom, make it a quick fix rather than just fishing around for it. So that was a helpful piece of advice that I just kind of was a fly on the wall for. but it works, and it's something that again should be, as we continue to play and get better at the instrument, second nature to us.
Yeah, it's kind of like you develop the instinct for it. I mean, I remember in high school, they always told me, like, when you're taking your Scantron test, the multiple choice test, like whatever your first gut reaction was, that was probably the right answer. And like if you go and change it, like you almost always get it wrong. I know it's not always true, but I found it to be true most of the time. So it's kind of interesting. You train those instincts, and then from there, you're able to hone it more and more. So that's awesome. Well, let's see. So what do you think are some of the main important teaching points for trombone in general? Like what are like some of the main things that someone needs to have to be a successful trombone player, whether just in high school or professionally?
I think you have to have something that's really important on the trombone is good slide technique. Legato in particular is something that I feel like I get to with students really early on, just because it's different than other instruments. If you're playing a saxophone or a euphonium or even a trumpet, to get a great legato, you can pretty much just push the valves down or the buttons or whatever and blow steady airstream, and it takes care of it for you. But on the trombone, we don't have that option. If we just move the slide, we're going to get a glissando. So we actually have to teach something called the legato tongue. And this is where we use like a do or a da syllable, da, 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 da. And we have to coordinate our slide, our tongue, and our airflow. And so this is such an important skill for every trombonist, and it's something you never really outgrow. When I pick up the instrument every day, I'm always focusing on my sound, my air, my slide, getting everything coordinated and working together. And so that aspect, slide technique, great legato playing, a great sound, these are things that I feel like we have to address really early on and address every day.
Amazing. So would you say this is another great point is, would you say that all of your colleagues that are in these premier bands, would you say that when it comes to daily practice, they're all focusing on fundamentals and focusing on kind of the core basis of their playing?
I think at this stage of the game, anybody that wins these kinds of positions has put in a lot of fundamentals work into their instrument. And that goes for a lot of orchestras as well, to have a position like this. I think to maintain, to be a player that has a routine and goes through these things, you have to always go back to the basics at the beginning of each and every day. And I see that happening a lot with my colleagues, and it's encouraging because it inspires me to do the same. And I think of it kind of like building a house. You have to start brick by brick. And if your foundation is not there, you can't do a lot of the things you want to do because your foundation is not solid. And so fundamentals it's the building blocks of everything we do. And it's so important for young musicians to get strong fundamentals from a very early age and understand how things are working and just how to make a great sound and how to be efficient, how to be relaxed, how to be coordinated with your slide, all of these things. Having great rhythm, that's something as a percussionist I know that stress, but it's so important. It's the backbone of everything we do as musicians, and so having all of these things is super important for young players and for any player especially.
For sure. And band is not always known this way, but it's a team sport. It's a team game. So everyone doing their part outside of the ensemble and bringing that into the practice and being prepared, time wise and technique wise is huge. So that's great. I have one last question for you, just because I'm curious. Because I didn't know this. We had a piccolo interview last week, and I didn't know that like piccolo and flute were just like so different. Like they're different, some different fingerings. A lot of the playing technique is different, and you can actually like major in them separately. Like I was wondering if that was the same with trombone versus bass trombone, or are they more similar?
Well, so yes and no.
Okay.
There are similarities. There are things that they share in common. Slide technique, great sound. All of these things are really important, regardless of whether it's bass trombone or tenor trombone. But with bass trombone, you're adding a second valve to the horn, and so it gives you this whole different series. It's a different combination, different ways of producing the note, and so it makes it its own unique instrument. And so I tell people, if you're going to do bass trombone, that's great. But it is its own animal. I think of it as its own instrument. As much as it shares in common with the tenor trombone, it has a totally different role in the orchestra. It has a totally different role in general with that it's kind of the bridge between the trombone and the tuba. And then it has so many different features about it because of that valve that it requires a lot of time for somebody to navigate how to do that. That if you're spending all your time on tenor trombone, obviously you're not learning how to do that. So I do think of it as a different instrument.
All right, that's good to know. I've been learning a lot about different instruments. It's kind of amazing. I find, and this is one thing I always admire about band directors is, they're learning to teach all these different instruments. And meanwhile over here, like you and I are like a super expert at one, but then I know nothing about clarinet. I don't even understand what they're doing. I just like the way it sounds when my colleagues play. But I always thought that was a fascinating thing about a band director is that they kind of learn to juggle all these different techniques.
So my undergrad degree is actually in music education, and so I had to take class brass, class woodwinds, and learn about these different things. With tenor and bass trombone, the bore size is different. Basically with the bass trombone, there's more tubing, so that's what creates the lower sound and the bigger mouthpiece. But taking all these different methods classes really is enlightening, like you're saying. I mean, there's all these things that people do, and when you're playing in an ensemble and you see them doing it at the highest level, you're not even thinking about the fact that, he's got to change his reed, all the time, or he's got to, all these things that they do so well. You don't catch those things, but I do remember taking clarinet methods, and I was horrible at the clarinet. It was all squeaks and squawks for me. And actually, funny enough, when I was student teaching and pre-student teaching, instead of playing the clarinet part and getting a clarinet and trying to demonstrate it, I would rather just play the part on trombone up the octave. That was always easier for me than trying to demonstrate the clarinet, because anytime I would pull out an instrument like that, the students were very quick to say, "You're not a clarinet player, are you, Mr. Westjohn?" Well, how can you tell?
That's not true.
With brass instruments, you can cross over and kind of fake it a little bit, but not as much with woodwinds. It was harder for me, but flute came easier. So it's always one or the other. Flute is going to come easier, or clarinet, but it's hard to have both. At least for me, it was.
Wow. Is there any knowledge you picked up during your music ed degree that you feel has like just paid huge dividends in your private teaching with trombone?
I always thought, my primary reason for doing music education, I knew I wanted to perform for a living and do those things, but I knew that being a better teacher would make me a better player, and I knew it would make me a good colleague, and it would help me in my private teaching, having worked with students in a full classroom setting and getting exposure to what that was like. I think any kind of teaching, you have to be passionate about it. You have to care about the kids. You have to get to know your students and find out what their goals are, what their passion is, and then it's your job to help them achieve their goals. And so for me, when I was in the general classroom, I was amazed at how I was still able to do that, even in large groups, no matter how large the group was, still being able to make a collaborative goal, and then walk with the students through that semester and help them do that. And then in private lessons, it was just kind of doing that same thing, but on a smaller scale. Instead of a team effort, a collaborative effort where you're all focusing on the goal, it's just one student and they have a specific goal in mind, and it's the same thing. You're helping them set realistic expectations and pushing them to help them achieve that goal that they have in mind.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. That's really good. I couldn't agree more. It's kind of the same philosophy I have with my students as well. So, well, are there any final words or thoughts, words of encouragement for band directors right now, or thoughts about teaching in general you'd like to add, or?
Yeah, I could say one thing that I kind of hit at the beginning of the video for any students that are watching this, or for teachers. One of the most helpful concepts, like I said at the beginning of the video, for me was learning how to become my own most important teacher. And I had a teacher that taught me this very early on, and more than even playing the trombone well, this was so valuable because his point was, I hear you once a week or twice a week maybe, but you hear yourself every time you pick up your instrument and play. And so teaching me to recognize I've got to be self-evaluating all the time, and I've got to be holding myself to a standard, not just having him hold me to a standard, but I've got to be motivated intrinsically, and I've got to be my own most important teacher so that when I'm practicing, I can play something and say, hey, this isn't as good as I wanted it to be. What can I do to make it better? And kind of focusing on it from that aspect of things rather than just hacking away at the instrument and hoping the etude works itself out. And that's something that, I feel like is a common pitfall for a lot of students, is they just hack over and over at something. And so being smart about your practice and how you're practicing and being efficient with that is so, so important. And I'd encourage any band director to tell their students that during this time, because there's a lot of time that we're spending at home and has been. And that's so important that even when a teacher is not listening to you, you can still be rapidly improving and be self-evaluating and getting better. So
That's incredible advice. It's really good advice, and I hope a lot of people listening take heart of that. Well, I think this is a good place for us to wrap this up. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I know that we're so grateful to have Austin teaching with us this fall, to have such an accomplished, humble, and elite musician, working with us. I mean, when you think of premier bands, I mean, there's not that many professional band musicians in the world. So you're part of a small collective of elite players. So Austin, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to talk today.
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
All right.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today for that interview with Austin Westjohn. Austin is such an accomplished trombone player, and he's also just a great guy and a great resource for students this fall. So thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to having you back tomorrow and Sunday for 2 more interviews, one with Matt Evans, who's our saxophone teaching artist, and one with Scott Leger, our horn teaching artist for the fall. Matt Evans also plays in the U.S. Army Band's Pershing's Own, and Scott Leger plays in the New World Symphony. So the depth of skill and talent that we have coming in for these interviews and for our teaching programs this fall is huge, and we're so grateful to have these caliber of players on our roster of teaching artists. So definitely don't miss those 2 interviews this weekend. They are going to be amazing and packed with audition tips, advice for students, recording ideas. And if you'd like to find out more information, you can head over to our website, www.banddirectorsurvivalguide.com. If this video was helpful or interesting in anywhere, please give us a like, please give us a share, and you can also follow us on Facebook at Band Director Survival Guide and Instagram at Band Director's Survival Guide. So we hope to see you back tomorrow and Sunday, 7 p.m. Central, for the next two interviews. And thanks again for tuning into this great teaching artist interview with our trombone teaching artist, Austin Westjohn. Thanks.